Yeah, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, EU Regulations for Medical Devices and in Vitro Diagnostics. My name is Linda Ronkowska, and I work as intellectual property expert at Riga Strategic University, and I'm supporting researchers and innovators in navigating intellectual property strategies, protection pathways, and help with early stage commercialization. But within the BioFood platform, I contribute for shaping IP readiness and innovation support for new photonics-based and medical technologies that are developed in this platform. Let me also briefly introduce the BioFood platform for those who maybe do not know that name. The BioFood is a national or Latvian collaborative initiative that accelerates the development of innovative solutions in the fields of optics, photonics, pharmacy, and medicine. It's really connects all necessary stakeholders to support teams to move from early concepts to clinically and commercially viable technologies. And we all know that regulatory issues is one of the major pillars in development of medical devices, and therefore we all are here today to know more about those issues, and we are very pleased to welcome today's lecturer, Stefan Bolleininger, who is a managing director and senior regulatory consultant at Consultys Medical. Stefan has extensive experience in supporting startups and research organizations, and also different kind of innovation platforms across Europe. And he specializes in guiding advanced technologies through complex regulatory pathways and transforming promising ideas into compliant, market-ready medical devices. And therefore, I think he's an ideal expert to lead today's discussion on medical device and in vitro diagnostic regulatory requirements. Before we start some technical issues, I need to say that this meeting is being recorded. And yeah, if you have any questions, and I hope you will, put those questions in question and answer session, and we will manage to answer them even during the meeting or afterwards, as Stefan will prefer. And yeah, I think thank you all for being here, and I wish you all insightful and productive session, and let's begin. So Stefan, the screen is yours, and yeah, let's go.
Hello, thank you for the nice introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So we have a wonderful, funny topic, the medical device regulations and IVD regulation, which is well not most of the most fanciest and the most interesting topics for many in the research, because unfortunately all we do is paper. All we do is documents. Everything what we talk about there is how we handle the documentation correctly, what we need as part of the documentations, and what it is. So we have two different regulations, MDR and IVDR, so one for medical devices, one for Vitro diagnostic. However, they act quite similar, but I will explain that in the next things. Okay, if you have questions, please put them directly into the chat window, then I can refer to them or put them into as a slides later. It depends on where we currently are, so I'm very open to do that directly on time if possible. Good. Okay, why do we have that funny system of medical devices and IVDs? We have in Europe a very, very broad and great overview about what kind of devices and people we are. And that leads us to a big problem. Since we have IVDs, we have medical devices, we have biological devices, we have every kind of different device types, from simple things like bandages, protective equipment, or wheelchairs, to the highly complex MRI or defibrillation products, or ICDs, and also very much of complex biological products. So it is very hard to regulate it. Comparing that to the easier part like automotive or railway technologies, but it all has the same purpose, just a bit more of comfort or less comfort, more speed, less speed, and a bit of more technical decisions. We have a lot of decisions in the field of this is our product purpose and what the product needs to consider, need to do. So for us, in the medical device field, the regulation is a way more complex topic and a way more open and fuzzy one. So the law itself is not that precise as it could be, for instance, for automotive devices or for other products like railway, naval, or even nuclear. So our scope is extensive, and that leads us to the problems about regulations. We had in the past a few funny parts of the regulations. So the first one was 1986, then the second one was the revision of that 1993, then 2007, and now we had the last one was 2017, that was MDR and IVDR. And it started with a quite simple sentence. The goal is to ensure a simple and easy to understand regulatory environment for medical devices or in vitro device diagnostic, which ensures the efficient functioning of the internal market. That was the claims they brought into that book. That was the claims they started with and wanted to go forward with having a good setup and a good regulatory environment and framework. Yeah, the native law text is 174 pages. For both ones, so 174 for IVD, 174 for the IVDR, and ISA for the MDR. So both of them have around 170 pages. All right, that's on one thing quite good. However, well, it starts not with simple. Okay, the first claim of the sentence of what they wanted to do is already gone. The second part was to read and understand and implement them correctly. We have at the moment around 700 additional documentations, the so-called MDCG documents. Not talking about standards at that point, which would increase that number significantly higher. Just talking about those which are directly related to MDR and IVDR in that case. These are the MDCGs, and we have around 700 pages of MDCG to explain 174 pages of law. Yeah, that's quite intensive. So easy to understand regulatory environment is also something which is gone. And since what we've seen with delays about implementing it from the start of 2017 when it was in force to 2020 when it shall be actually now finished installment, to 2021 where it was shifted for one additional year because of COVID, to now 2026, and it's still not everything available what should be there. So what you see is the internal market cannot be controlled and organized that simple as it was tried to do. And some more we added into the laws, some more we added into the specific action items in the laws, additional articles, some more frustration and regulatory issues it will become later. So it is very important for you to, and also for us, for everyone working in medical devices, and especially if you want to do very new things or new products. In that case, it's very important that you have a good, clear, and good path forward. What is really necessary for you to know and to need. All right, so I said already it's two regulations, MDR and IVDR, which is applicable for the whole European Union. Well, not only European Union, because it also considers the as the Norway right now as part of it in the European Economic Area. as well as it is applicable for most of Turkey. And unfortunately, compared to the last, what we had in the past with the MDD, it is not applicable anymore in Switzerland. Switzerland has an additional setup and an additional set of laws, how they want to handle it, which is quite similar. However, it does not work in the correct way. Same, by the way, is for England. England, as with Brexit, they are not part of the European Union anymore, and therefore the law is not binding. However, they have a similar set which is utilized. So, and the good thing is, it is a directly applicable European law. When you look at in the past we had a directive, and now we have a regulation. So that's a significant shift in the law setup in the European Union at all. It's not only happening about medical devices. If you switch from a directive to a regulation, you have a few benefits and a few downsides, but let's talk the benefits, because they are more easy and it's better to understand. So in a directive, you need to translate that into a local law. So a directive is utilized in the European Union, however, it needs to be created into a local law per member state. Each member state needs one, which was on one member state said, well, yes, we took it exactly as it is into the law and referred to it and say, here we are, this is now our new law. That happened, for instance, for France in the MDD world, in the former world, since 1993. They just utilized and say, that law is valid, we use it as it is written in the European Union documents and MDD. CMDR, the regulations, IVDR as well, or other regulations, are a bit different, like a GDPR as well. They are directly applicable European law. They do not need to underwent that procedure about, I do my own law out of it. However, they can utilize it, but the regulation is already, by its nature, binding for all of the member states of the European Union. That's why it is a bit more difficult also in the parliamentary procedures between the council and also parliament, as well as all the authorities. The regulation is a bit more complex to initiate, whilst we have it in an easier way on a directive. However, as seen in the last years, the system of directives is not used anymore quite often. It's only to a few last points where the member states could not agree. However, most of the new laws are based now on regulations, as it is the better systematic and the faster systematic for implementation. However, it's just two regulations, so you need to decide if you're an IVD, say, or a medical device. The definition is quite simple, and that's most of the things are similar. However, on an IVD, you are measuring or analyzing something based for diagnostic purpose only, and that is outside of the human body. So it can be any kind of cell you extracted from the human body and then brought it into some kind of vial or other pouch or other shelf where it gets analyzed. A medical device, on the other hand, can perform also a therapeutic action towards the human or diagnostic actions directly on the human, like EEG, like ECG, or MRI, such things, whilst the IVD normally has analytical procedures behind it, and that's a different story in the setup of the regulation at all. So these are two very important things. However, both of them fulfill the same systematics, the same contexts, what we need to include, and one of them is, for instance, also the laws and standards used. It doesn't matter if I use IVDR or MDR, both of them relate to all of them relate to certain particular standards which are very important. Like one is the quality management system, which is mostly the ISO 13485, the risk management, which is the ISO 14971, usability, which is the EN ISO 62366, clinical evaluation, which is the 14155, in addition with the 18696. And there will be others like software development, it's 82306, 82304 or 62304, depending what kind of software you use. And this is standards which are, as it is a harmonized standard, it is requested by the law to be included. In addition, there are options like in this example for Germany, where you have a national supplement for a certain law, which gets then with additional supplements or supporting laws and supporting regulations from the country directly. So there are still additional opportunities and possibilities. There's no need. Each member state needs to decide that on their own. However, they have the opportunity to go that way. Looking into that about the concept about standards. See, standards, there are two sets or two groups of standards. One group is the normal standard and the other group is the harmonized standard. A harmonized standard is the more important one because a harmonized standard is linked to a regulation or directive. Like when I talk about the E and ISO 14971, that's a harmonized one, where the regulation has them in their official journal. So each regulation has an official journal, and that is a list of harmonized standards which are utilized to fulfill the requirements. With that way, they get nearly directly applicable law and the level of a law because of the official journal. How is that implemented? So the point is, they start any standard. Normally, it starts in the International Organization Committee or an IEC or something at that level. Then it will be reviewed by the European Union. If it is fulfilling a certain need in a certain direction, then it gets an European norm, EN, and gets an European annex. In most cases, they are called ZA, ZB, ZC for medical devices. And these are the annexes which are used for ensuring where that standard and in which clause and in which article it links to IVDR and MDR. So that you have in that annex a list of, okay, chapter 4, 5, 6, and 7 of that standard fulfills the articles 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 of IVDR and MDR. That link is a very important information in between and a very important step. So that's something which is relevant to know and it's relevant to organize in your development, and especially since you are still, in most cases, quite advanced and still not in a production state, so it's a very early development. In that case, that's things you should already consider. For instance, for technical products, the parts about risk management, usability, as well as development, like software development, should be already considered all electrical engineering. Others, or biocompatibility as well, things like the quality management itself, there you should look at that. However, not as it does not give you a constraint or a detail into your product. It is not that much needed on a certain product or a certain product development. Therefore, you have a bit more freedom in that way if you want to use it right now or you want to take it on a later stage. However, at the end, if you want to certify your product, you still need it. But you can decide when it is the best possible way in your portfolio, in your platform, in your thought-through process, in the project management, when you use that certain law and that certain action. And that's an important and a very important step, which you can balance right now, your documentation effort versus your effort in in the direct development or in your effort, what you need to do now or later. So it's a very important step to take that into account. The main idea of that all is that we have a balance between the product safety, and the product use compared to the compliance. So with compliance, we only can do that with documentation. We can only do that with integral documentations, with not acknowledging the local laws, every local law which could be applicable for your certain case in all the member states and also the European laws, and then also comparing that to build up the best possible product. The fun thing is there are a lot of interesting parts in the compliance which will alter your product development. Like there are things like you need to add in specific fields for the product which fulfills things like the social state or social register of a certain member country, which you don't need for others. Like, for instance, one of the examples is that for France, if you utilize an electronic health record or want to use it, you need to include the maiden name as a mandatory point, whilst you don't have that in the German pathway. So in that cases, you have the definitions and the possibilities to switch in between and to look into the compliance and the requirements, vice versa, from all the countries you want to go, which will then help you to make the product, the right product you want to have, and the best possible product you need. That is something which is very important from the beginning of the development. So the MDR and the IVDR are not only there for giving you the regulatory burden, but they should also give you additional knowledge and additional information what you need to implement by utilizing the right compliance rule. And that is one of the main steps forward into the system. However, the basic concept of the full certification and the full classification process is the following. You start with the product claims, classify it as an IVD, as a medical device, then introduce your basic knowledge or the existing quality management system, create the technical documentation, which also includes the general safety performance requirements, including the clinical evaluation, then also deals with the risk management and the usability until you get to the CE marking. And that is then the main step, because the CE mark gives it a legally possibility to get into the product into the European market, and then you need to follow up with post-market surveillance anyway. I will talk about post-market surveillance in a later stage of that webinar, and I also will talk about the technical documentation, GSPR, and clinical evaluations also, as well as quality management systems. So these are a few things we talk with today. However, it is very important that you have the full picture of all of that steps available to ensure that you have the right and good setup, that you know what is coming for you and what will come up in a later stage and what you really need to implement. So from the point about the product documentation, as you can see, it is the complete setup. Why? You need to start with the claims. The claims fulfill your few things about your product, about product knowledge, which then helps you to justify it correctly. Then it's also very important for intellectual property adjustments to know how your claims are, because they are also relevant for all of your setups, also your marketability, your business behind it, your idea behind it, and your product strategy. That depends a lot on the claims, and the claims in the medical device world will lead to all of the other steps as necessary, as needed in your documentation. So how do we get to claims? For the claims, we need to ask ourselves a few questions. So the first thing is, what does the device do? Is it for prevention? Is it for prognosis? Is it for diagnostics, therapeutic? Is it for analysis of specimen? Is it of analysis of any body material or body parameter? Is it something which helps to restore, alleviate, or therapy in a certain sector or in a certain possibility to get clear about what the device does? And the others, and I will link that later on, and the other questions are, okay, if I know that now what my device shall do, what it shall aim for, I need to find out what are my patient population. So who is my patient? What is the clinical picture of that patient? Because it's different if it's an in-hospital patient, or if it's a home care patient, or if it's not a patient at all and it's an enhancement product, which is also possible. And that leads you then to your indications for use. And the indications are the points where you need to clarify, my product is indicated for treating the following, for diagnosing the following, and there's a boundary. You cannot use it with the following contraindications. You cannot do that. So in some cases there are contraindications when you are not allowed to use a certain product. So you have indications and contraindications included, and it's very important that you get clear and get all the information about both of them. Additionally, you need to know if your user and patient is not the correct one to each other, so it's not the same one, or is it is some complete independent person, so the user might have different views, knowledge, or ideas behind the product like the patient would have, and therefore it is very important that you know about your user as well as the patient. For instance, products which are intended for the patient group, a patient population, to be kids, younglings, or people below 12, then your intended user is definitely another one than you will have on the patient group. So that's something you need to decide during your documentation, and that's something you need to decide during also development. And then comes to the next point, and that's the principles of operation. The principles of operation, that's unfortunately when you look into that slide and with all claims and whatever it is, the principles of operations, that's the only technical point in that overall claims system. I'm very sorry, but that's the only thing where physics and product and technology gets its place here, because the first thing is ensuring that you have a device utilizable and you have a device which is in market possible, and then you get to think, is your how do you achieve your intended purpose and describe it. So one thing I left on that slide, and that's the overall and the final outcome. That's the intended use. The intended use is normally a statement with 1 or 2, maybe 3 lines, which tell as precise as possible and as broad as possible what your product actually does. That can be my product is utilized for diagnosis, that can be my product is utilized for therapy of a certain patient, group, and therefore it is not intended for other things. Like that's a clear and simple description. Like the product is a defibrillator used for people with cardiac arrest or fitis or ventricular issues, and then you can use it. Contraindicated, all people with flatliners. That would be one thing. That would be intended use. It's formulating 1, maybe 2 sentences, maybe 3 lines of text, and that gives the clear and individual statement. And all of that from that slide, that's very important because it determines the class of your product, the risk class, and with the risk class there are coming certain constraints, certain boundaries we need to fulfill during the certification, because that is one of the main levels. So going back on what the medical device is defined, medical devices could be any kind of instrument, apparatus, device, implant, a reagent, material or others intended by the manufacturer to be used in or on the human for a specific medical purpose, like detection, like prognosis, diagnosis, prediction, alleviation, therapy, whatever it, and all of that, for injuries as well as for disabilities as well for diseases. Then also replacements of the anatomy for a physical or a pathological reason. Then also in vitro examinations and the knowledge about what the product will do in the body. So there are also those kind of things we need to include and ensure that you have a device. However, and there comes the point, it is not a medical device if the main and the principal intended action is pharmaceutical or immunological or metabolic mean, and it is only on the human body mean and the part of where you have a direct physical system. One thing, products for contraception and promoting of birth are also medical devices, even if there is no direct disease coming in with that. However, it is preventing transmissible diseases, therefore it is in that group as well. One last group in the medical device section. These are all products which are used to sterilize or clean or disinfect medical devices. All those are also a part of it. So that gives the broad view about what a medical device is, how an IVD is introduced, how they lead with a certain level of detail towards medical device regulation, or at which point they are not being under the circumstances or the setup of a medical device. So, now you know the scope, now you know the claims. However, who is always made with part of it? And therefore, the medical device regulations have a very nice concept, and that's the concept of the economic operators. The economic operators are a group of roles defined by the MDR, which deal directly with the medical devices, are responsible for the medical devices, and are somehow, in some ways, documented in the regulation together with certain requirements those economic operators need to fulfill and what they need to do. I will start with the biggest one of them, that's the European Commission. The European Commission gives the law, ensures the law is controlled, or the authorities for the certain law are controlled. It ensures the pathway and the information about a pathway and the information about the handling of the authorities, the handling of market access, as well as ensuring that the law is translated and utilized in all the member states. That is done by the Commission, and the Commission utilizes the authorities, the local authorities, the member state authorities for that part to make the surveillance of medical devices in the European market more clear and more precise. So that's one of the main things. So authorities and the Commission work for the market surveillance, and they work for ensuring the pathway is somehow clear. Since the system of medical devices was already done in the past with another group of economic operators, the so-called notified bodies, these are also now also in the IVDR and MDR included, and the notified bodies are the agencies you use for market approval for higher class medical devices. In the pharmaceutical world, you have the Commission, you have authorities, and then you have the topmost authorities, the EMEA, European Medicinal Agency, which is fulfilling the registration and the certification or the approval duties with the manufacturer. In the medical device world, you have the notified body. The difference is the EMEA, you don't need to pay. For the notified body for medical device approval, you need to pay. Well, for EMEA you pay differently, but you still pay. However, not in that way. For the notified body and the manufacturers, they have a direct line of communication, and they have a direct economic participation. So how's it called? So as the notified body will be important person, and it will be an important role, and it is directly economically connected to the manufacturer. It is not connected with other ones, but with the manufacturer, and the manufacturer pays, and that is one of the important things. And the surveillance happens directly between manufacturer and the notified bodies. They don't need the authorities and the European Commission. The authority will only be a substitute in case if it's a class 1 product, so a low-risk product, then the notified body is not involved, but the authority does the same. So that leads us to our main participant of the overall setup, and the main participant is the manufacturer. The manufacturer is the one who is responsible for this well-designed, usable, and technically good product, and the manufacturer is responsible for ensuring that the European laws are all held. Everything is on the manufacturer. The manufacturer can outsource things to other organizations. However, the manufacturer is always the fully and sole responsible for the medical device market access. No matter what other rules are there, the manufacturer is the one who is responsible, and that is very important for all of us to understand, because that is the clearest and the most advanced part in the MDR about telling, and not advanced part, but the most clearest part, because there was no coding, there was no additional circumstances, there was no possible way left or right. It was just the manufacturer is responsible, period. That's it. So, however, there are certain additional things, like if the manufacturer does not produce the product or design the product by themselves or outsource any other things, they can have a list of suppliers. Since 2017, suppliers are somehow also taken into account within the overall roles and responsibility matrix in the MDR. However, not in the case like the manufacturers, but as an addition to the manufacturer, and it should be seen as such. So it should be a very clear request and order to the supplier, and the development or all kind of, it can be time and material, it can be a service or whatever, a supply to the manufacturer needs to be documented in the same way or in the same level of documentation as the manufacturer would expect from internally. So they have the surveillance to surveil the suppliers as well. Sometimes the notified parties will go there as well and take more care about the suppliers' documentation and production. So we have it now from, we are organized, we have a product, the product is built, however it's not sold yet. And that's why we have an additional other groups, the representatives, the marketplace, the distributor and the importer. The representative and the importer only come in place if your manufacturer is not within the European Union. If that is the case, then the manufacturer, so let's see if the European manufacturer is, let's take Brazil. Is in Brazil. Then they want to bring products into the European market. That means they need to set up a representative who is enacting instead of the manufacturer within the restrictions of the European law. So that one needs to ensure that transport, all the knowledge, and the product is legally on the market. It's a legally clear product in the market, and the representative has the authority to pull the products back from the market if the manufacturer does not do that. So they can do that. They can fulfill most of the duties together with an importer, so they can be the same role, the same company, can be importer and representative, or it can be a different company. That's totally up to the setup. And the importer has all the applicability and all the restrictions of the process of bringing it through the country, so customs and ensuring the traceability between the manufacturer and the individual customer or the individual buyer of a product can be included. That is very important, that the importer has that role and knows that role, and also since they have sometimes, and that comes to the next one, sometimes the combination together with the distributor has not so much jobs from the law perspective, however one very significant one, and that is ensuring that the product is safe in the European market, even if the manufacturer is outside of the European market. So that's something which is very clear to be introduced, and it's very clear to be organized by the distributor together with the importer and the manufacturer, sometimes also with a representative, that you have a clear market access and a market bringing. And based on that, the distributor as well as the marketplace could sometimes be congruent. The system of the marketplace has been introduced because of MDR, also recognizes such things like Amazon or Temu or Google Play, whatever is needed, so which they are not a direct actor as a distributor, however they are somehow like a distributor and somehow a bit different in the market organization. So that means the manufacturer, if they utilize Google, Apple or whatever, Amazon, and or their stores and all that information, that means that the manufacturer needs to ensure that those companies will continue for him with the traceability. So it is an important step in that overall setup that the European Commission included things like Amazon, Google Play or Apple Play, because that helps them to ensure that the line of market access is complete and the line of market access is being controlled by the manufacturer as well as organizations who are under surveillance of the European Union as well as certain authorities. Alright, so these are important roles. Most companies fulfill maybe one role, sometimes two roles, not so much, but that's up to any individual setup, how you want to organize it. It's important to know that these roles are available, and these roles will give you additional insights or additional supply chain system. It's not that you need to do anything on your own and anything by your own. So, next step is the classification of medical devices. So classification is not very much changed since 1993. We have three main groups, class 1, class 2, class 3. And since in the previously we had three laws, the MDD, the IVD, so the Medical Device Directive, the In Vitro Device Diagnostic Directive, as well as we have the Active Implantable Medical Device Directive. Some Active Implantable Medical Device Directive has been removed. It has been incorporated into MDR. So these are additions, and when you look into the classification, we have now many more impacts on that, and that's very interesting to look. So three main groups, class 1, class 2, class 3. However, they have different additional things, like there's for class 3, and there's a subgroup class 3 implants. For class 2, there's a class 2A, a class 2B, a class 2B implant, and special additional things like active administer medical substances and all that parts which are more related into the high risk products, but not that high risk that they need to go class 3. Same is with the class 1. So class 1 is the low risk products with the lowest risk and everything on that. However, there are certain functionalities and certain parts where the risk gets higher. One of them is a sterile product, one of them is a measuring function, and the other ones are the reusable surgical instruments. They add an additional layer of risk, and therefore they need to be handled like that. And that is exactly what they wanted to do with the three classes, and how they go forward with the three classes and the add-on and the plus. And that is a very important understanding in the continuation of the context. How do we get to the classes? I have a few examples and a few pathways to that. Funnily, our system, and that's quite easy, our system contains of 22 rules for which all devices are included. All devices are only within that 22 rules. So that's easy. It's very convenient, comparing that to the US scheme where you have regulation numbers, so you need to filter and screen through all regulation numbers if you find an intended purpose matching yours. In the European Union, it's quite straightforward to have 22 rules, and you just go through the rules, which one applies, and the highest one in your product group applies. So, but I will go on that rules a bit later on. Because that's very important to understand previously that kind of the context, because it starts with the intended use of the device, so how the device is organized, managed, and how the device shall be used. So what we have is the claims, the initial thing, the intended purpose of the device, and then it goes from the devices into a certain set of rules. So non-active medical devices, the active medical devices, and the special rules. Active medical devices are devices which are having an internal or an external power source, without taking gravity into account as a power source. But whenever you have a power source there, then you are in the active medical devices. It could be pressure, so air pressure is a power source, but the most used thing is just a battery or electricity. That is the most power source used in the medical devices. So whenever you know now your intended use, you know your principles of operations, you know if it's an active or a non-active medical device, and that excludes you already from a set of rules. And however, always this as a set of the special rules always applies. So going for the rule set, and we go through that. If you have a non-active medical devices, you start with within in the left upper corner with non-invasive devices. Then you go into the invasive devices, depends if it's your device invasive or not, and you go into the special rules for non-active device. If you have an active medical device, you need to include the list of the active medical device rules as well. So you have the rules 9 to 13 also to be taken into account. And that is a bit of a difference in that rule set. So if you're a non-active device, you can skip those rules. If you are an active device, you need to run through all the rules and find the one which is the highest classification for you. As we are on that way, we need to include also the invasiveness, if the device is invasive or not, because if you have seen that filters also into certain groups, and also how long, and if it's invasive, how long, and which type. If it's oral cavity, if it's inside the body, if it's surgically penetrating, if it's a body orifice, that's totally up to the definition of the product, and that deals then with a certain additional rules informations. Non-invasive devices are then also helping you through the lines. So going through that, as you can see, you have there with the rules with the non-invasive and the invasive ones. If your device is non-invasive, then you can directly skip rule 5 to 8. If your device is invasive, then you need to include those rules, and that is how it layers into the overall setup. So in the best case, if your device is non-invasive and it's non-active, then you have rule 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it starts with 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. However, since many of those products are then also including an active or an invasive device, these are also not in that kind of rules anymore. So the naming of what I've put there as a headline for each rule, that's something I did. It's not perfectly from the law copied, because the law does not do that to give you bigger numbers of words and descriptions of it, but that is something which is quite a clear and quite a straight way. Okay, so that is very important with that rules. They are in the Annex 8 of the MDR and the IVDR, and you can find them there and go through all of them if it fits your product. In addition, there are for the rule sets, there is a how's it called? There is an additional MDCG document. Just nearly got lost of the name. There is an MDCG document which explains it a bit in more details and in a bit more more precise examples and better understandings what kind of product will be used, what kind of product rule will be used, and how to fit that to the product. But I try to put that here as well into a few of the examples which I use. One of them is classical pulse oximeter, which is quite simple to understand. Pulse oximeter on the finger clip, non-invasive, quite simple. It's saturation of blood, oxygen content in the blood of a patient by infrared light, so actually quite simple. However, it shows a very great pathway through the rule setup and asks about specific rules and how to utilize them. So, question is quite straightforward. The answer. So, at first, initially, the pulse oximeter is an active device, so I get through all the products, the list, so I skip the invasive parts, I utilize all of them from the non-invasive, okay, does not fit. Then I go to the active devices and see, okay, I find a device I find a rule active devices for diagnosis and monitoring. Wonderful, that works. So it's rule number 10 it is at first. Then we look into that in more details and say, okay, does that one has an infrared light, or does it have additional light, or if it's within the visible spectrum? No. Then it leads me automatically to, by definition and decision of the rule, it leads me to a class 2A product. Then it goes in the rule a bit more into details. Is it also allowing a direct diagnosis, because it has a crucial information, or not? Then it goes in the way. So in that cases, if the device leads to direct diagnosis, it leads to class 2A. If it's harmful and direct crucial information, then it would lead to class 2B. In that cases, since it is spot check, or if it's not human use, home use or patient use, since it's not directly with diagnosis like a patient monitor, therefore class 2A can be applicable. However, and then comes the last point, yes, thus a variation of the result could be immediate danger to the patient, no matter where it is utilized. So in that cases, to say, okay, if a drop in the blood pressure goes into a certain step, or it goes to a certain value, then at that moment, it is very interesting, because it's vital physiological parameters now, and that deals then directly into a class 2B product. So it's still same rule, it is always the same part of the text utilized. However, it's very important for you, if you go the way of medical devices, you need to be very, very precise about all that individual steps, all the work-throughs and all the informations delivered for the product, so we can deal it with a clear pathway through, and we need to be super precise by reading the texts, and super precise by reading it in a very straight and good format and way. So, second part, the European database. In order to get everything aligned in the medical device organizations, and how to ensure that the surveillance works well, the European Commission started to create a database called Ņemot. In the past, every member state had its own medical device database, where all manufacturers and all products have been registered somehow, and sometimes duplicated. Sometimes you need to have it per member state because of certain products. Some member states does not want to have a registration, and that was a lot of effort. So the easiest thing was to create one combined database, which is utilized for everything and everyone, and everything can be handled there. So they find there's a complete route about all economic operators applicable for a certain company and a certain product. So they find every authority, the European Commission, and all other companies can deal with certain steps and certain pathways for the manufacturers, and also they can see who is involved in the market access, who's the distributors, who are the importers and representatives if needed, what is the manufacturer certificate, do they have a longer list of complaints open, and that was expected to have in the European database. Well, since they started the project with database 2017, I can tell you it's still not done. It will still take until middle of this year, until it became fully mandatory. So 26th of May 2026, that is when it gets mandatory as a product. Okay. Okay, I can just answer the question, or I could place it on later. I've just seen it right now. Shall I answer it right now? Because it's quite interesting before I go into the European database. Patient-matched and mass-produced devices. It is so patient-specific, patient-matched, as well as the mass-produced devices. These are three different categories. The direct devices about the standard, mass-produced, are devices which are on shelf available and then will be introduced or will be utilized for the patient. That is the easier one for the for declaration. However, MDR, IVDR are fully applicable for those. Then that's directly from the normal device. So that is the normal device. That's a normal non-made up or non-made to order devices, and a standard clear device fitting on shelf products where they just will be shipped or dropped or can be bought from them. The other ones, the patient matched devices, are a bit more, are still mass-produced devices. However, they are a bit different because they can be adapted to a patient. So since for those the systematic of the mass production in advance and the scale of mass production is still applicable, those devices are the same as a normal medical device, and the normal medical device registration and certification. The difference is if it's a patient-specific, so if it's a custom-made device. If it is a custom-made device, then it deals with a certain prescription of a certain person, and so HCP, so healthcare professional, who can do that. However, the custom-made device is not bound in all cases to MDR. It's bound to safety and registration purpose of MDR, however not to certification purpose of MDR. So the difference is there, what it needs to be the certification pathway, and for the custom-made device, not scalable use, so it's really patient-specific, made directly on that specific premise. That one will then be utilized for that particular patient, and that one has, and that's a funny thing, it has no own CE mark, as the device cannot be CE marked as it is. For instance, that could be if you have an artificial bone replacement. Like if you get a replacement of a certain bone within the body that is only for you, it's specifically for you, it is prescribed for you, and that is then the product. So it will still undergo the same qualification and it will undergo the same rules in documentation, however not the certification, which means that product needs to be then approved by your authorities. However, they are not in such detail as you would have done it for the notified body, and that's very important since it is requested by a physician with certain parameters, patient-specific. That means you don't have to fulfill a clinical evaluation. You just need to ensure that that product is safe to be used with the human body and this particular patient. So there is a systematic about the performance of the device is not available because that is covered by the healthcare professional. So all others, if it's not done that way, all others are normal to be certified medical devices. Instances, quite simple ones, are for the custom-made devices, bone implants, also bone replacements, or other kind of implants which are very specific. Normal hip and knee implants, for instance, are mass-produced devices, so the device shall not be mass-produced. However, it could be an artificial bone or an artificial bone set to be included. So then you have devices which are patient-specific, patient-matched. There is an easy one, like is a hearing aid. The hearing aid is adjusted and set directly made for you as a particular patient. However, it's a generic device, it's mass-produced, and it's just fitted to you. If that's the step, then it is a normal device undergoing full rules of MDR. However, all the documentation efforts are nearly equivalent, so nearly the same, except custom-made devices don't have a clinical evaluation. All others are same, and there's no CE mark. Good. All right. So, but going back to the European database, to Eudamed. The database shall, and that is a very important step, it is not yet fully implemented, not fully available yet. However, it is quite good in that way, and we expect it to have it really applicable and available at the global level until 26th of May 2026. So that in that date it should be available, it should be fully usable for MDDs and IVDs, and all economic operators are working and looking for that. The fun thing is, we do not talk about Eudamed 1, 2, we talk about Eudamed 3. So it's a third iteration of Eudamed, because the first one was for medicines, so it was the European database for medicines, which is utilized for EMEA. Then they had an additional upgrade there as well, and now they rebuild it now for the medical device section. Why it is such kind of a long-term story and so much effort, I don't know. That's up to the companies who produce it. However, that is the as a state where we currently are, and it shall and always needs to document the authorities, notified body, manufacturer, importer, and representative, and it is visible for the patient. That is the good thing, it is visible for the patient can look into that, you can open the database, you can look into that and see if it is successfully applied, if it's good, if it's not good, and how you can get information from your manufacturer or from the authorities. If there is surveillance, you can get information about specific risks and risk notices. You can all see that in a database if that is already available and if it's included yet. But with the current state, only the authorities have that kind of view. However, as they want to have the patient also to be a major actor in the system, they will get that view in a later stage of the overall assessment as well. Good. So, then is a short notice. It deals with additional information, so not only as a part of the actors, it talks also about gets a fast access, it gets product and certifications. You can see then also clinical trial data, which is quite good and shall create more transparency and more control over the data you can give in the certain modules. The certain modules are quite straightforward, systematic. It goes first registration of the actors, certifications and certification documentation, which gives you a better view. And the other ones are the clinical investigation. If there's a clinical trial, you can link that directly to a registered product, which is part of the unique device identification system, at least in the DI, the UDIDI needs to be placed there, and then based on that and the information of the product, the vigilance, the market surveillance is also included. So on one side you have the vigilance data for what happened and what kind of fails happened where you have vigilance cases and reportable cases for the product, and on the other side is you can find additional information about non-conformities for patients, formal devices which has been done, preventive actions which have been organized by the manufacturer. So even as a patient, you get a very holistic view about the situation of that particular product into the market, and that is a very good way and a very good possibility even for any kind of person to look into the documentations correctly. Okay, one thing which is very nice there, which can help you in future, is you see also your competitors with the intended purpose they write. So you can see based on these screens and that informations who will be your competitor, what did they do, what was their flaws in the products, what is their intended purpose, what kind of certifications they use. You can see there a lot, and it gives you a lot of additional good information which can help you to maintain your product in a safe and good way, or help you to avoid the issues they had in the past. So the last block on the Eudamed modules is the UDI block, the unique device identification, which is luckily already implemented because it's very important for the product registration, and that deals directly with the system. So the unique device identification is just that what it is. It is a number. It is a number in a set of data about a certain product. So thinking about the past, or some videos where you had US detectives looking into the patient, yes, that he's all burned, not identifiable, but yes, we have now his hip implant, and based on the number we can track him who he was. Well, in Europe that was very hard to do because there are so many databases, and it was very hard to find that. Now with the Ņemot and with the UDI system, that is something which will be possible. So in that cases we have a system right now which has two parts, a static and a dynamic part, and that one leads to, together with a certain database, to the identification of the manufacturer, and from the identification of the manufacturer, the identification of the certain company, and with them, specifically for implants, they also can then deal with a particular, with the, how's it called, the particular patient, because they need to be registered in case of implant products. It's very good. It defines two parts. One is the DI, the device identifier, and one is the PI, the production identifier. The DI is a code which never changes for a certain product range. So this one will always be the same, same part, and always be the same, numbering scheme, and always be insured for the product. The PI instead, that's variable. That includes things like the serial ID, a manufacturing date, a disposable date, information about versions, and all that. And that's quite good because that helps two things. On the database level, in the European databases for UDI as well as for the database in the Ņemot, we only include the UDI DI, so the static data, the device identifier. That is very good because then we don't need to track everything from the PI, from the dynamic data about a certain product into that system. That is a very important step because that helps you now to identify who it was or which company, but you don't need to publish all additional information about an individual product. So that is something you can keep in your own setup in your company, and you don't need that to be shared somewhere. And that is for you that's for a manufacturer very important. Looking into that, we need to have two different carriers of it. One is the AIDC, so it's the automated identification code. That can be a barcode, it can be a QR, it could be a data matrix, RFID, there's no level behind it, it can be everything. And the other one was the human readable identification. That's something which needs to be also included on the product and gives the human readable part. Why is that way? The digital or the AIDC part, that is something which is often used in clinics because they have the scanner, and that is way faster for them to scan 100 products which are in relation to a certain patient than writing down all the numbers. So it makes it much more easier and much better. Much better for the hospitals. However, for the normal human, we don't use the AIDC code, we use just the HRI code, and that is sufficient for our purposes. But it is relevant to have both codes included and both parts included to be ensuring that everyone can understand it and everyone can utilize it. Convenience, yes or no, it doesn't matter. So, looking into those parts, as we said, the UDI-DI device identifier is a static code. It is combined with the so-called GTIN, the Global Trade Item Number. That's one of the databases utilizing for that is GS1. There are right now 3 databases, GS1, HIB, CC, as well as the other one is I think IPCC or something-ish. Most of the companies use GS1 as their UDI-DI handler, and it always has a fixed length. It's always given, so it's given from the database. It's always Yeah, it's a data type is text. However, it's just a number string, so it's not text actually. Always has 14 digits, and it's always introduced into the same way. So the first part of it is the manufacturer, the first part of it is the global location number. So that's the manufacturer's number and the manufacturer's identification. Then there is a continuously upscaling list about these are the numbers related to that global locator number, and from that is the most important one because that has all the information about the individual product. So going back to that and dealing with that, the global trade item number is utilized as a UDI to ensure that we have a good setup. It's maintained in the database of GS1, HIPCC, or whatever you use. There are a few of them are allowed by the European Commission, so those two I definitely know that they are. There's, I think, one or two others, at least one other. And all that helps to know now where to go for and what kind of product will then be included and requested. However, it does not help yet to go into the detailed level of the product and know who this particular product has at the moment. That's something which needs to be done in addition. Second. Okay, yeah. I will close the Udemy topic and then I would go into that into the software topic. I will close the UDI and then I will answer that one. Okay, so UDI-DI, that's the device identifier, that's fixed, and the other one is the dynamic data UDI-PI, so the production identifier, and it's very important with dynamic data, and that's very variable, not related in any databases. So this is a database the manufacturer needs to maintain on their own, and they decide on their own. It's just placed on the label where they want to use it. So the PI is not transferred to any database, neither in US, nor in EU, nor nobody there, and it can contain a batch or lot number, production, expiration, serial ID. It could utilize also the software version number if it's needed, and it has a certain set of codes because these application identifier, AIs, are already included, and you need to have at least one. So you can add as much application identifiers as you want. It just increases a very, very long string of data for the UDI in total and makes the barcode and the information of the barcode bigger. However, does not help you. So take as less numbers you need, as less application identifiers you need. It only is relevant for identifying the product and ensuring that you have the correct one. No need for further further informations behind it, no need for additional documentation behind it. That's all for you as a manufacturer where you want to set it up on your own, and no need to transfer it to any other database. It's very important that you keep set numbers and you know the numbers, but it's up to you, and also it's up to you how much you will use of that particular application identifiers. You need to have at least one to identify that individual product, but that's then a different other thing. Alright, that all needs to be maintained in the UDI database. If you have the single registration number, what kind of controls you use, but you don't need to implement each of the controls. Then also the information about the product, but that's all what you put into the Udemy database as well. So in the UDI database, registering a product takes you normally around 5 to 6 minutes. In the Udemy database, it takes you around 10 minutes to document it. Good. So from there, I want to go into the declaration of conformity at the product level, but first, I want to answer the question. Okay, software classified for CE marking, specifically software for diagnosis, scrutiny. The software does not provide direct definitive diagnosis, but rather potential disease cases by clinicians. Such software could or could not be integrated into any hardware physical device. Oh yes, that's a very good one. So, there are a few steps in that. So the first one is, the first one is that you have a software with a diagnostic, a prediction, or a detection purpose. At first you look into that and say, okay, your software is utilized for a certain prevention, a diagnosis, a detection, a prognosis, or a prediction of several diseases. If that's the case, and since it's diseases, then it is a medical device. So it classifies already there. It does also classify as a medical device software if it is not a direct diagnosis, but ranking potential things like it could be the following 5, 6, or 7 diseases, or you should look into the following interventions, you should look into the following next diagnosis steps. All of that would be a medical device unless you don't use or you don't create data, but you link there to different other data, like when you have a software which gives a certain how can I say, a certain layer, or which gives us a certain feedback from the human body. It gives a certain diagnosis, a certain signal, a certain analysis, and it's used for that. And then you have a prediction. Then it is a medical device. If it is just referring then to articles online about statistics, about data, about information, generally available information, then you could still argue that's not a medical device at all, and your software is not introduced into that pathway, and the software is not referring particular to a certain patient, but to the cohort, and therefore it's not a medical device. That's the other part. If your software is utilized for the potential disease to the clinician, like a scoring record for a certain patient, if it's not generic, if it's a certain patient and refers to a certain disease possibility, then in this context it would be a clinical decision support system in any way, and that could then lead to that would lead into a calculator, and that's in most cases class 2A or class 2B of medical devices based on the rule 11 of the medical device software. But I will talk about the software topic in way more details in 2 weeks, when we have been there on the 17th of March, when we had the next round, which is particular only software topics. So then the discretion, if the software is integrated into hardware or a physical device, only makes one difference, and that is the classification. If the software is in a physical device, in a hardware device, and that is generally available, like a smartwatch, and then you derive the data, and derives that data for the medical device usage, then only your software, your app, will become a medical device, unless you say you need to rely on a certain qualification and classification of the performance of the hardware, of the physics. Then this could be a medical device as well. Or you can categorize it as an accessory, which would be a medical device, or you can validate it together with that. Then your device combination is not a medical device, and you can skip it by going only with the software as a medical device and not utilizing the smartphone as one, a smartwatch as one. If same happens with a smartwatch, if your hardware functionality is already a medical device, like let's say a patient monitor, which is a class 2B medical device. And what you do, and it would also have, for instance, it would have a defibrillator included, and now you add a software which says, hey, I see, based on the heart rate, I see that there is an issue now with that particular patient, and I know about my characteristics of the device, what I can do. Now I start triggering the defibrillator that it gives it directs a shock signal. In that cases, or charges that already, in that cases, this combination would require then a closed loop system and would then qualify as a new medical device. So if the software is on a general hardware, it's not such a problem. If it is specific hardware and extends its previous functionality, then this is to be classified as a medical device with higher classification, because then in most cases the Rule 11 kicks in for medical device software. So software handling data from a patient and dealing with the greater good for a certain patient, not for a cohort, is considered a medical device. That's a rough thing. That's a very rough saying for that. And if it integrates with electronics or any kind of other physical hardware, that hardware can be a medical device. It can be an accessory, and being an accessory means also being a medical device, or it can be a common usage product or a custom available product, like when I look into the new cars from BMW, they have an integrated ECG from the steering wheel. It gets the data from the steering wheel. However, the steering wheel, as well as the car, is not a medical device. However, the software analyzes the potential differences, and with that, it is a medical device included. However, that's just the software part, because the hardware does perform other functionalities without even thinking on the software as well. Good. So, let me go back to my slides, because I want to go now with the product documentation and how we go from product documentation to a declaration of conformity. So there are a few sets of documents we need to consider. I will later on tell what's the general set of documents we need. However, this is at first the individual part where we have the basic setup. So we go from a product documentation, then we need to have some standards, external standards, test labs, sometimes to be tested, and based from that we create after that the general safety performance requirement checklist, which tells us now we can do the declaration of conformity. That is a general approach and the general way forward. However, that was in the detail, and that looks sometimes a bit different. So looking into that, I go from the standpoint of the MDR Annex 2. The MDR Annex 2 defines what is within the technical documentation. It defines what is needed to be submitted to the notified body, or what is needed for a Class 1 product to be available, and it gives all that information about the general setup and the general placement. It includes the names, the address, identification, and the conformity of the devices, then what is the relevant technical standpoint, so what standards or common specifications are used. So on one side, who is available, who is responsible, who is dealing with the product, economic operators, and then what kind of standards or common specifications are used. Standards, I already explained. Common specifications is something which is introduced here newly in that slide. The common specification is a new concept within the European Union, and it can deliver a list of, you might say, bylaws for the product development, which is not introduced by the MDR. However, it is introduced with that concept by the European Commission. So the European Commission can set up common specifications, which means they don't need to change the MDR. They add a certain specification, technical specification, to certain products in addition to the MDR or IVDR, and therefore the manufacturer needs to fulfill it. That is the possible pathway, what they can do, and what they can do in addition. They could also do the same with laws, that they introduce, with standards, that they introduce a standard as a common specification, then it would be directly applicable and directly binding. However, since standards are mostly maintained by organizations who want money for, that's not yet the case. Section 3 of the technical documentation in Annex 2 is the description of the device. So that's the first thing when we really talk about the device at all. And that is about the intended purpose, as I had on the slide, as well as the claims on your certain product. And that's a very important part, because that will lead then later on to the Section 5. Section 4 is mostly the same as we did for, or as everyone does for US FDA. It's a combination about the labels and the labeling system, instructions for use, UDI documentation, medical device symbol, and that leads then also to the next documents about, because that is a very good interlink between intended purpose and claims to IFU, and that links then also to the clinical evaluation plan and report in the Section 5. So Section 3 to Section 5, removing the MD symbol, and that UDI is just a number, it deals always with the product performance and what you can expect from a certain product. And that is a very important way in the bench testing and clinical data summary, and helps to understand the concepts they had with the MDR, to focus more on the clinical data compared to what they had in the past when they did not have been so detailed in there. I will go on clinical evaluation and clinical data later on as well. Post-market surveillance and PSUR, that's also part of the bench testing, because that interlinks with the clinical evaluation, with post-market clinical follow-up, with the CER, because it's safety and effectiveness in the market, and deals also with the benefit-risk discussions. That's why it is in the same section, Section 5, Section 6, to include all that benefit setups together. So, the fun thing is, it takes now 7 sections, 7 paragraphs in the annex when we talk the first time about the product design, development, specification, architecture, verification, validation. So everything else is included there, and all passes are there. So whenever you have those implementations, the implementation documentations about the product, how you do it, requirements, architecture, designs, drawings, whatever is needed, that's all in Section 7, whilst it's only talking about benefit, risk, clinical performance, and setup, and how it is utilized in the product structure. That's all in the other chapters 1 to 3, respectively 4, 5, 6. So, as a manufacturer, you look into that and see, okay, looking into the data, economic operators, those are quite easy to be fulfilled and done. However, then you have the technical information, technical specification. That's the biggest point. So actually, looking into that, the discretion or the balance is a lot in Section 7. There's most of the documentations, and most of the effort, whilst from that view, labels, performance, and clinical and risk analysis seems to be more important than having a good product. How the documentation is built. If you are quite early in development, you can start quite easy. And what I want to give you with the following sections, I want to give you a good example of a good documentation. However, that is not conclusive for everything. It is just a rough part, and it will relate then later on in way more documents than you would have. So it all starts with your quality management system. So if you have a class 1 product, you need to fulfill the MDR article 10.9 related to your intended purpose, your classification. If you have a class 2A, class 2B, class C product, you will need to fulfill ISO 13485 in addition. And however, the difference between the MDR article 10.9 to ISO 13485 is not so much. The difference is around 20% of the QMS, because most of them is already requested from the MDR and needed by the MDR. So it is not such a big difference what you could consume and what you need in later stages. So based on that, based on intended purpose and your quality management system, you start with the documentation. You start with each steps which are mandatory to be implemented, all things you need to consider, all points, everything you need. You know now what you want, you know with your QMS how you organize it, how you would do that with your templates, whatever is needed. And based from that, it goes into the next step about, okay, we need to plan our development. And that's what happens now. Now comes the planning layer with the clinical evaluation plan, with the risk management plan, with the design and development plan. It can be a test plan, it can be a development plan, it can be DDP, it's just up to everyone. It can be the software EMC test plans, evaluations. It can be also a biological evaluation plan, which I normally refer just to the risk management planning. But that is all the planning layer. That's a very important layer as well, because that gives you now the steps what you need to do in your upcoming development and how you develop it. After that, in most cases, after your planning stage is done, you go into the next step, and the next step is the user requirements, product requirements, and the use specifications. So now we talk the first time about product. This is information for products, this is for user requirements and for the use specifications, what are requested and required for fulfilling your product performance in the technical and the usage way. It is not the product performance for the clinical or the clinical performance way or for the risk way. It's just about, is my product good handleable, usability, and does my product fulfill what I want? User requirements, product requirements, use specifications. This is what I want as a product and how I create my product as I want to have that. And since I know, and that's now knowledge, because that gives me my requests to the products, the next step I go is design, development, as well as technical, mechanical, biological design. That's up to every product, up to how you do that. There can be an architecture, there can be a drawing, a formulation of some liquids or other things, microbiological stuff. Then it always includes a label and how you want to document the particular label for the product. And then you know right now, okay, that is my implementation, that is how I did my product. So I know my architecture, I know my design, drawings, whatever, source code. Now I know how it is built. Now I need to go back the step and ensure that I can implement it. I have my implementation done correctly. So, there's a modeling. So, software design and the electronic and mechanical design and the label. These are your indicators. You just build your product. After that, and there's a bit of a mistake happened. It's not a summative evaluation which is joining in, it's a formative evaluation. Unfortunately, I mixed those two fields in the creation. So we have a formative evaluation for the usability, which is just about saying, okay, I implemented my use specification, it worked well, I considered all my design constraints I wanted to have, and that's what I needed to include. And based on that, it goes forwards and goes to the risks and the literature search. So as you can see now, you need to know that your risks have been implemented correctly, your risks have been assessed correctly based on the risk management that relates to your risk management plan in that way, and whilst your clinical evaluation plan relates to your literature search, unless you want to do a clinical trial, which most of you hopefully don't want to do. So with that level, you get to a more closure to the product, and then comes, and unfortunately that's wrong, and that ends the summative evaluation. So I mixed summative and formative evaluation in the text here. So the formative evaluation, the first one is just, did I build my product correctly? Do I assume it is correctly? It can be done by checklists, design review, whatever. And then comes the summative evaluation. The summative evaluation is done on a completely finished product, on a built product as it should be, and gives the impact about summative wise this product is maintained or handled by a statistics of users in a correct way, which could be, in normal cases, most manufacturers use 15 test participants to get data if the product is good, because with 15 you get a very nice statistic out of it. You can also use 5 if you accept a higher fail rate, and you can use a lot of other circumstances. However, some things you need to consider is you always need to do that for your full setup of all steps in the how can I say, of all steps in your product design, as well as all participating patient groups. That's why when I was at the beginning of the session, the patient group is very important here as well, because as patient and user group define in the summative evaluation how many persons you need. If you have one user and patient group, it's quite simple and straightforward. If you have multiple groups, especially different groups, then that will lead to a higher number because you need to have more statistic. As a manufacturer, you need to decide how big your statistic needs to be on that end, and that can be rationalized or can be done by utilizing it in the correct format about looking all your particular data, all the data sets from the evaluations, all the knowledge you consumed during the steps, and then you go with your next step about it, deciding if your summative evaluation was successful and it was good. Then the summative evaluation tells you, yes, my product poses less risks in the case of my device usability, handling of the device, and then only the technical risks and remaining clinical risks will be there, and therefore the product has a better using potential than this. Since the standard is called usability, don't be confused the way that usability in medical devices has something to be with able to be used to perform the intended purpose, rather than I build a good and great product everybody loves. So, being able to be used, fulfilling its purpose, is better than having the best product everyone loves. In the next one, after that is done, after you know now you have the right one, the product is built correctly, you normally do the design release, so you have a milestone where you say, now I'm done, now I have everything, everything's good, and you start with the validations, that you perform the product, performs its purpose. You know it first with the handling, so it can be handled correctly, but now you need to find out if the clinical performance can be fulfilled as well, and the clinical performance is done in a correct setup, in a correct good way, which will then be covered at the end with validations closed by the risk management report, as well as the clinical evaluation report dealing with certain with the literature and the clinical evaluation plan to ensure your product has been developed in the right performance. Your performance are good. Your risk management report tells you now my product is quite safe and I don't have any unacceptable risks I cannot justify. There will be risks sometimes for products which you need to justify the particular open unacceptable risks, because that's part of the technology or part of the product, part of the intended purpose. And then these combinations will help you to create the final thing, that's the general safety performance requirements document, which leads then to the declaration of conformity. The General Safety and Performance document is a document which is the Annex 1 of EU MDR, and it's a straightforward big list about these are all expectations from the product which can be either accepted, which can be either applicable or non-applicable for the certain product. However, this particular points have been pre-discussed on the European level, and most of the European level thinks that it was a good one and have included them in that particular list. You need to answer all of them if you want or not, because these are your general basis, what you could do and how you could do that. So it is important that you have that particular list of GSPR requirements and you fulfill them completely in accordance also with the reference evidences, with all references you need, and all the standards to be covered there. All right, since I would go now into the next topic. I would make a short break of 5 minutes, and then I would go back to the presentation with going to the conformity assessment procedures and how we can do those. Yeah. Okay. All right. On one side, we already had all economic parts, all orchestration parts, everything which is needed now, and how we decide on a technical documentation, how we go forward. But now we need to talk about how we get the product into the market. And that is two very important steps. One of them is the QMS, the quality management system, and the second part is the conformity assessment and the conformity assessment procedure, which you either do for a class 1 product internally for your own, or which you do by which you do by the notified body if that's handled by external organizations in case of class 2A, class 2B, class 3, as well as class 1 sterile, class 1 measuring function, and class 1 reusable surgical instruments. So that is something which is done to be in addition and needed to be done in addition as well. So look at that very carefully and select your product. So that's why I always talk about backwards with the intended purpose of the device. That is one of the main things, because as you have heard, intended purpose leads to classification, and classification leads to conformity assessment and effort. However, on the QM side, it's in most cases nearly everything the same. So, and that's what I want to give you here. So the first thing is what you need to do in a company is building the awareness for quality management systems and quality management, and that's something what you need to do. And it's a stepwise approach. It's okay, we all know now we need to go into a medical device field. We want to go into a quality management system, and therefore we need to ensure that we have the right and good setup. That also deals then with the next step about the inventory and formulation of objects. What do you want as a company? We don't want a quality management system about this is my personal space about how to document. You document for a need, and that particular need needs to be somewhere justified, and it needs to be done by objectives. And the objective help you to formulate what kind of inventory you will have and how it will be organized. That will lead then to the QM documentation you will need to have based on your intended purpose. You can go Article MDR 10.9 with all the procedures, which is a very good list already, or you go with the ISO 3045, which gives you then all your chapters of documentation. And then there are a few additional steps. One is training. As you have procedures, you want to have procedures because they make you more reliable in your organization, because if everyone does it in the same way, we do it everything in the same way. Then we have some staff training. And that staff training will lead then in addition to more efforts and better concentrated paths forward. Then internal audit, which is done to ensure to you to be organized according to your quality management system documentation, so you fulfilled all your documentation, and in the management review you decide, yes, I am done, I have my product, I have my QMS, and I'm sure that I'm having that to fulfill my objectives. So that deals again backwards to point 2, the objectives, that comes back in the management review. And then certification, that's a last step, and that step depends if you need it or not. If you don't need a certification because you have a class 1 product, then you can skip that, and you don't need to go further with it. If you want to go in the full quality management system and you want to go into the certification, or you need to go into the certification, then that's a mandatory step. However, it looks like so. For the certifications, the internal audit and the management review is mandatory. If you don't need to certify yourself, it looks like it is not mandatory because it's not part of the step what you need to do prior to it. You can do it at any time you want. You need to do that, yes, Article MDR, Article 10.9. However, it's not mandatory to do that prior to the certification, so you can skip that for a time. However, I really recommend you to do that directly in the directly in the full flow of building up your quality management system. If you do not do that way, it will lead to certain frictions and certain problems, and that is not very good and helpful for you in your organization. So run through exactly that steps, no matter if you need a certification or not. It will help you during the time, so it will be very good. The point is, and that's for many of you are in very early stage, the point is, when do you need to start this kind of activities? To be honest, even if you are, so as long as you do not plan a company to be built or to make out of it, then you don't need to do it. As soon as you start playing with the idea about you want to make that product you're right now developing and researching for to a business, at that moment I would start already with the 3 steps: awareness, formulation of objectives, and then the QM documentation. However, I would not include the full QMS yet. I would be very, very precise, and that's something that we can see in that slide here. When you look into the ISO 13485, which is a very good work for it, you can see there are several chapters. In the case you want to, you know, that will be a company. However, that's a very long way to go. You skip chapter 6 at first, you skip the chapter 5 at first, you just talk about chapter 4 and chapter 7. These are the ones which are now relevant for you. These are the chapters you need to fulfill in the beginning if you are very early stage. The other things come later, they come during the time. However, 4 and 7, these are the ones you need because they develop your product, and your product is then developed on a very good stage of documents, and that can be utilized in the later way. So these are the ones you need. The other ones we don't need now. The other ones you need prior your product will hit the market. So prior to your certification, then you need to implement all of them. Yes. However, you do not need to implement them everything in advance so far. So look into your time plans when you can do that. So last one, see chapter 8. So everything with the measurement improvement, as well as management of resources, management responsibility. It's quite easy to be included, even if you don't use it at that moment. However, the hard things are 4 and 7, and those help you to be very, very early in your overall documentation setup, in your design setup, in your product setup, and that helps you to bring the product forward and in a structured and organized way without a lot of things around, left, right, and whatever. All right, good. Then, based on that, what you need to do. So, as we all relate to the law, MDR, IVDR, as well as the ISO 13485 as a standard, so what is communicated that it would mean meant by QMS, design documentation, and quality records? It is dealing with the following things. At first, you have the procedures and the templates in a certain way. So procedures is how you want to achieve something, whilst the templates is the part with that is exactly already predefined. It gives you all the required keywords, all the required information, so you can create the documentation correctly. It is, from my perspective, better if you take more time into very good templates than in very nice procedures. Let's face it, if you put MDR to Copilot, ChatGPT, whatever, you will get wonderful procedures out of that. But you don't get good templates. So the effort and the knowledge is more in the templates, which can be reused for every section you do during your product development, compared to the procedure, how you shall utilize them. So it is easier and better to deal with a good set of templates compared to a good set of procedures, because they can be transported way more easy. As a next step, then based on that, based on templates, derived from procedures, you create the documentation which is relevant for you. And we generally have 2 different types of documentation. One is the document, the controlled document, and the other one is the record. The definition of both is quite simple. A record is every document which is issued once and is not updated because it's newly created. Technically, it will be updated because you take the old draft, write something in, change something, and then you find this new one. However, the record is more date-coded, whilst and not version-coded. If it's something version-coded, then it's a document. A document is changeable, it has an approval, it has a review, it has an approval and a review, and it needs a different certain quality of signatures. The record itself is not changeable, it is as it is, it can just be redone, and it has an author and maybe someone who looks into that and reviews the data for correctness. However, it's not changeable, so it's more protocols, more document plans, more document reports. The plans would be more than the part of the document because the plan is changeable, and there you can switch in between what kind of document type you need depending on your particular outcome. And that is very important to put that also to the templates. If it's a record, if it's a document, because it all has different forms and different benefits and different downsides. Look into that. The clearer definitions you also get with Copilot in a very good way, really good way. Okay, so whenever you've been there, we look into the conformity assessment. You start with your intended purpose, go to the Annex 8 of the MDR, that's a classification rule, as said, and then you, and also slide with the classification rules, and then you get a certain classification for your product. Based on that, you have to do your documentation. Annex 2 we already discussed, Annex 1 we already discussed, post-market surveillance documentation is also linked to Annex 2, also good. UDI is just the definition how you do the UDI, that's the Annex 6, but that's quite simple because you already have that in the Annex 2. And then you have this as a complete structure in your product development and documentation. GSPR and technical documentation is available, and also, as we had a minute ago, the QM system is now available, and the QM system is now doing the correct pathway forward, and that leads now to the definition of the conformity assessment. So, as you see, there's a long list of classifications, and that leads then to different outcomes. And that's why I want to talk about with different products. When you see about that, you have here 3 products, an MRI machines, then you have a laptop, ECG with a laptop, and then you have a hip implant. These are 3 totally different products. One is a long-term implant, no electronics, technically very good and very good producible. However, it is a very complex thing to put it into the human body, so there's different risks there. Class 2B in most cases, long-term invasive. Then you have the ECG system, it's a 12-channel holder, quite simple. Since it's not a patient monitor and it's not a simple direct alarm, so it's no problem. It's a Class 2A product or maybe Class 2B product, depending on how you want to organize it. And then you have the MRI device, Class 2B, diagnostic, direct diagnostic, very intensive. And the difference between the ECG and the MRI in that case is just about the money. You don't have the MRIs in a very high number, so you don't sell them in a very high number. Nobody buys them in a high number, and that is an important step, and that's something why I put them here in comparison to each other, because they will then deal with the particular classification rules. I looked into that a bit more. Long-term invasive, non-invasive, device and software, non-invasive short-term, transient use, including radiation. Sometimes it can be magnetic or it can be other radiations, and it's non-invasive. So as you see, both products are somehow linked to each other. One is short-term, one is transient, so that the risk profile is a bit higher by the ECGs there. However, with the radiation, device risk is now more on the MRI side. And still you see 3 products which are not comparable at all. However, they all go through the correct and same setup of the medical devices in the European market. which means we need to go through the conformity assessment, and the conformity assessment has certain aspects. The first aspect is when you deal with a class 1 product, so we start with MDR, Article 10.9, as always said, with the quality management system, have the technical documentation, Annex 2, Annex 3, then also we have the Annex 4, Annex 6, Annex 8, that is all covered, and we know now it's a class 1 product. So you can see that with the class 1 product right here. That's the class 1 in that build, and that means as a class 1 product I can, as a manufacturer, place it on the market on my own behalf. So for class 1 I don't need to go through a certification, nobody challenges it. However, that means me as a manufacturer, I assign the conformity assessment. There's no 4-digit number of a notified body, it's just simple the CE. That is how I need to place it, nothing further. And according to Annex 4 of MDR, with the Declaration of Conformity, there's basic information. So, and then I am, as a class 1 product, fully responsible for everything connected with the product. So I need to bring it into the market as it is. I need to bring the product into the databases, just the UDI, put it into Udemy on my own behalf. I'm full control, nobody else looks into that, that's totally on me. I can do everything with that, and that's on that part not that bad. So for me, easy with a class 1. Then if I have another product, and there for instance there would come in the ECG device, I could do the following. I could go with the Annex 11 for a class 2A product for a product conformity testing. Together with the notified body, as you can see here with the 4-digit number, I can go through a certification. So, it's a class 2A product, I need to do a certification anyway. Now I need to decide which pathway of certification is the best and the most usable for me, which I should take into account. And there I have a few options. So that's one option, product conformity testing, which means I just need to take care about the conformity. It will be batch approved or time approved by the notified bodies. They don't look into the design and development information. They just look into production and production qualification and performance test. They need to do on a batch record, so they put it into a batch record. However, not in the however, I'd say I don't look into the design and development documentation, and they don't challenge that, and they don't change the challenge the change control, which makes it quite nice there. The next one would be when I go, for instance, the same way with a class 2B and a class 3 product. So if a class 2B is an invasive or an implant, or it's a class 3A product, I need to do prior, because I don't want to go with a design qualification yet. I want to go in a type text examination. I can do that, combination 10 and 11 now. Where for 2B and class 3, I can set the notified bodies number of product conformity testing if I have ensured a type test examination. So the company did the type testing, they ensured that it's working correctly, they know that the design is set up correctly, so all that design documentation is good. However, they don't challenge that on a regular basis, so no possibility of changes on the product. And then I can go with product conformity testing into the next step and decide then on the manufacturers. That works quite well. For instance, if you have products which are either high risk or which are products which are not sold that often. So as you can see here, the MRI, that would be a possible pathway with a class 2B product, as well as for the hip implants, that would be also a very good pathway. There is an alternative. I will go into that now, and that is the Annex 9. The Annex 9 is the complete quality management system. So it's applicable to 2A, 2B, 3, Class 1S, Class 1M, M1, Class 1R, together with the notified body. If it's not a pure Class 1, I cannot use that, because then I'm always in the Annex 6 part. I can go Annex 9 if I have a full quality management system according to ISO 13485. So that's the mandatory important point. And if that is the case, I am able to show that, and I show all change in documentation controls during routine audits which happen every year, and make sure the surveillance is continuously up to date and it's included and everything is good. If that is the case, then this application could be working. However, it would work for all of the devices, and it would work for all of the devices as it's class 2B, class 3. It would work there. I can do all the changes. And however, there's one thing why I sometimes would go in a different way. If I either have my product not sold that often, like MRI, the cost of the NX10, NX11 per unit is better than the complete quality management system NX, the NX9 cost. Therefore, in that cases, if I sell 5 or 10 devices a year, I would go rather that way. Since it's a high-risk product, I cannot do changes on the product anyway, so on my own, so I need to have the type examination every time, even if I have the complete QMS, because that's part of the contracting situation with the notified bodies. In that cases, I don't have a benefit anymore. With the high-risk implantable products, it's the same. I cannot change them on my terms compared to medical device software in class 2A, so it is the easier way to go into the type examination and the product conformity testing for a larger batch number. I can also go with that devices into the Annex 9 and have the full UMS. However, I would only recommend with those particular devices, with the high-risk implant as well as the MRI, with the high-cost, low-volume products, I would go that way. Only if I have additional other products which are already covered by the complete QMS. Else, it's better for cost efficiency to go the other way. For the medical device software and the ECG system, where I have a lower risk, where I have a high changeability, and that's for medical device software a very high case, I would always go NX9. I've seen it once that someone took another route. They took the route with the NX11, which I would never recommend anyone, because you have the negative impact. You cannot change it. However, you have no cost. No cost rationalization. So for a medical device software, always go to the NX9. In total, it looks like that, and I have a few other pictures, I think. Yes, here we go. So in the case, what you can do is you can do with software, you go product conformity testing, and you can go NX9. In the hip implants, you can go NX10, NX11, plus or NX9, but NX9 I would go in that cases only if you have a higher number and a higher variations. And with the MRI, you can go NX10, 11 combination or NX9, but I would recommend NX9 only if you have additional other products which are utilizable very well under NX9 together with those, because then you get the benefit of the certification. Else it's more cost efficient to go 10, 11 compared to 9. Because the type text examination needs to be done by all changes anyway, therefore you don't have too much benefit of that. So, next part is the post-market surveillance. Since the product is after the conformity assessment in the market, we need to talk a lot about the post-market surveillance system, which is very good enforced within the MDR, and it's very strongly introduced there, which is quite good and has a lot of additional information, and that's something which really helps you as a manufacturer. It's, yes, on one side it's a bit of a pain because you need to create documents and records. On the other side, it helps you a lot to gather data from the past, what and where you can increase or make your device better and more clear. So on one thing, what you need to do at first is you need to decide about how and what you need to do. So the MDR has a few a few very nice articles written about it, and it wants to know safety corrective actions in the field, then the record errors and the side effects, all trends, all registers and literatures they find, feedback from the users, feedback from any economic operator, comparison to other products in your field and in your type, and that all needs to be combined and created into certain reports. And there, the MDR is a very good pathway, straightforward. So, funny thing is, a lot of in the past, a lot of discussions have been around that articles. However, it's quite straightforward. They created a template for the periodic safety update report, posted that as an MDCG document. Just use it. Actually, it's just easy as that. Unfortunately, it's a bit of effort. However, it's a good pathway and a good way forward to create a safe and strong product. In the system, it wants you to be a suitable, active and a systematic product development procedure, which helps very well during the full setup in the data lifecycle, in the product lifecycle, and also deals then very conclusively and very clear about the product lifetime, and very good about the conclusions you made. That is the important thing. So it shall give us a good ways and good straightforward pathway to say our product is safe, our product is clear, straightforward, our product is acceptable in the straightforward pathway about a medical device on the market. And a very important word which I avoided during all that right now is our post-market surveillance system is active. So that is a very good thing. What means active? Active in that case means the exact opposite to reactive. So our system, our post-market surveillance system, shall not be only looking into the past. It shall be something which is triggered, which is organized on a regular way, not just on causes. So whatever, when I said, oh, there's how something happening, I need to do that, that one wants it to be worked through item by item by item in a good way forward, in a pathway forward, in a structure forward. And that is the difference from the old world to the new world, from MDD to MDR, because in the MDRD it was okay to be just reactive and not dealing further into other steps or other activities which you have not done in the previous way. So, yeah, it means, and that is the outcome of it, the outcome is our data analysis shall give input. And that with an impact our risk management system, our manufacturer's information, the Udemy database, what we had in CAPA and corrective action systems. It should also help us to increase the usability of the device and the monitoring of products as well as competitors, and also do trend assessments. Trend assessments is one of the biggest things with MDR developed there in that topic as well. And then, but I will go that later on, I think. And then additionally, what is our outcomes based on that impact? It defines new outcomes, new measures like field safety corrective actions or corrective and preventive action systems, which help us now to make ourselves better and the organization better. Give me 1 second. We'll look for that. No. I will talk about that right away. The trend assessment, Article 88. The MDR has a very nice article, and therefore very nice requirements what you need to do for that for trends of medical devices, how to evaluate if it's a trend or not. It is quite a simple and straightforward way if you know how to do that. We had seen many manufacturers who are not able to see what is a trend. They looked into that and said, hey, a trend it is already if I have a statistically increase of a certain issue. Principally, that's right. But the MDR in that article does not want to see what is your particular trend on a certain issue. They only want to see and want to have it reported to the authorities in case there is a trend with a certain negative impact on the benefit-risk ratio. So if you see a trend and that trend is already part of the benefit-risk ratio, then it's okay. So you only need to establish if there is a new trend. How was it done? What's the easiest way for it? If you look into risk analysis, there is a risk diagram which gives a lot of information about severity, probability, about a certain risk. And as soon as you are still over your risk acceptability line, so whenever you decide the risk is acceptable or it's not acceptable, as soon as you're with that particular risk, no matter how often it is called, are still above the line, or at least not changing your fields and going to a different probability group, if that's the case, that means our product is still sufficiently safe for the trend assessment. It does not mean that you don't need to add other things and ensure that your device can be better. It just means that you have there a certain cover, a certain product safety, and that is sufficient for the current step. Does not mean that this is sufficient for you as a company and organization. Sometimes you need to do that by your own as well. Good. Okay, so trend assessment, I want to add that additionally included here as well, because I think it's a very good way and a very good information we need to include, and that helps us to get into the next steps for the medical device safety. So, beyond that, the MDR has a very strict set about what they require for the planning. As said, it's a proactive process, so that's something which needs to be included, and therefore they created the Annex 3, the Annex 3 of the MDR and IVDR, which deals exactly with that. How is your process? How is the clinical follow-up, post-market clinical follow-up? Then what is your indicators, thresholds, and trends you have evaluated, the timings, what you want to do, and how you identify your procedures and measures including the corrective actions. So that is a very, very good and a very needed way to evaluate the device. And actually, as you said, look into the document about the periodic safety update reports, the MDCG document for the PSOR, that gives intense documentation knowledge about how the planning will happen, what the planning will do, and how it goes in a straightforward way. So that's something which you really should tackle and encounter and look for, because it helps you a lot to build the documentation quite good, since you are still, as I know from the first things, you are early stage, so at that moment it's not that relevant yet for you. However, it will become relevant, and then you have a good opportunity to go for it. Planning, as said, proactively means you conduct a market analysis, complaint analysis, communication, and you decide about your trend assessment methodology. So, actually, that topic is it sounds boring. It sounds pretty boring, but since you are right now in your definition of the product, or a very early stage, or at the pathway, market and complaint analysis you can get is very, very useful. It helps you to avoid issues others have. So whenever, even not talking about post-market surveillance, just talking about the device development and how to make a good product, you should look into the market analysis for you as a business case. That's one thing what you definitely need to do. You need to do that for anyway, so it's not a big thing. And then you go into complaint analysis. Complaint analysis is a bit more tricky. On one side, you can challenge products which are on the European market, either by the European database, if there's something, or the manufacturer local national databases, where you get then responses from field safety corrective actions, from complaints with human concern, and all that stuff. And that will be something which then will be very helpful to you to implement it. If there's something on the basis of the manufacturer incident notices and the field safety corrective actions, because there you can see also the technical implementation of what they did, and that helps you now to avoid that issue. If you are a medical device software, presumably an application, an app, then please look into your competitor products' app stores. There will be loads of things you could do better if you utilize that data correctly. So log in the data, log into the procedure, and then go for it. Okay. Yes, the recording will be available after the webinar. That is a bit of a better picture of what I already had with the intended purpose, but that's not relevant here. What I want to go for now with one topic is the clinical evaluation, because that is also something which is very, very cumbersome and a very hard step in the documentation procedures. And the clinical evaluation is an important scientific basis. So that's something which is very important, especially since you need to ensure that you have sufficient clinical data available and you can utilize that data for your clinical evaluation and risk management files. It's very good and it's very needed. So it's now constantly updated and it's very, very decisive about your product is correct in your market segment. So how does it work? It normally, as a clinical evaluation, consists of, as I already said in another slide, the clinical evaluation plan, the literature, the researchers, and the clinical evaluation report. And in the plan, you need to decide which kind of routes you will want to go for your certain product. So you do the competitive analysis, you analyze the competitors, what kind of data they have, how similar they are to you, similarities, and real similar products, how comparable are you to this one. Based on that, you go into the evaluation of the clinical literature, what literature is available, what study data is available. It is expected to have some real world or real data for your device if you want to go into certification. So that would mean that you need to have something which is super comparable. So really comparable based on also where equivalence can be proven on technical, biological, and clinical pathway. So with a full intended purpose, or it is relevant that you have an additional or a clinical trial which gives data for your particular product, or you have a simulated trial, or you have other databases and informations which help you to ensure your device is safe in the market. Also, clinical literature from foreign products, which is currently public available, PubMed and Cochrane and all the other databases. If you utilize them, you need to justify why that database, why this article or this literature or this study is applicable for your device. And that is a clear and a good, straightforward way. And in your clinical evaluation plan, you decide which route you want to follow, which route you want to go, which is the steps you want to go for in the pathway, which steps you want to follow up in your evaluation. How do you get sufficient data? What is your qualification of sufficient data when you think you have sufficient? And then what is your particular outcome? I have a few things you need to take into account which are really important. So what I said, you can use clinical literature if the clinical product is safe, the product has the same design characteristics, based on either the product has particular setups which make it equivalent, or you need to have it in a certain other way about literature analysis for devices which are currently in a clinical trial in the same case as you are, intended purpose comparison. All that needs to be done in the clinical evaluation plan, and sets up the right setup and the right path forward. So that means on one thing you get the impact of the input from the safety clinical, from the GSPR, the safety performance requirements, which you need to fulfill, and then the literature gives impact on the risk management, post-market surveillance, vigilance if needed, the clinical review which you conduct for your device, the CAPA and the change control procedure. So it's all interacting, and that is the good thing what MDR got or IVDR got compared what we had in the MDD and IVD world, because now we have a better analysis, a better view of all that parts of all the items and how those can be continued and can be fulfilled and how they live in other documents. So the interaction and the breakthrough between document to document to document, that's something which is very important. So what can be used for your particular product? Not everything can be used, but you need to be very clear. Clinical trials for your particular product? Yes, that's good clinical data. Clinical trials where similarity is detected or equivalence can be used. Reports and clinical trial of products, or also statement reports for similarity is possible. And then you can get it from post-market surveillance and post-market clinical follow-up data, where you get register studies and something like that. What is not possible? So it's not possible to utilize bench data for Article 61, unless there's one excuse I can tell you later. Then bench testing data, since it is technical data, it does not work. Data from animal studies or from cadaver studies from dead animals does also not work for a clinical trial data and clinical data safety. As also, if the study is not fulfilled either the ISO 14155, or it has no ethics committee vote, so bioethics vote, or all that, if the study is not correctly, formally not correct, then you will have issues with utilizing that articles in the clinical evaluation. We need to go there through four different terms which are very relevant. The first one is the clinical performance. That is the ability of a product due to its technical functionality or a clinical functionality, including the diagnostic. So the results in features from all direct and all the indirect medical effects are fulfilled or stated by the manufacturer's intended use. So we can state that the clinical performance is given if we fulfill the intended use based on everything we can see about what it is achieved for the patient. The clinical benefit on the other side is the positive impact of the product over health of a person, which is also measurable, continuously clinical result, including also some things like positive management of the patient health systems, or also it can be public health. Evaluation, clinical evaluation in that case means a systematic and planned approach for continuous generation, collection of the data, including clinical benefit and everything. And the clinical trial, that's an investigation. That's not very shocking what it is, and it's not very new information, so that is quite a straightforward way. In a possibility, you can use in the clinical evaluation, you can use the data from studies, from equivalence, or from literature. And if you have certain phrases within your high risk product, you sometimes need to have them contracted by an OEM contract, that you had the right setups and the right outcomes. Investigations with the own device is very well possible and gives the best possible data, and also literature, if you can utilize it for your product or from a comparative product, is also a very good step. So, good thing is also a variation of all that options and a mix of that options can be done. You need to justify that your solution is sound, and you need to justify that your solution gets the correct results. But it can be that you take it from all the pots you have here to get into the right step. One of the things what I wanted to go, that was a bit too fast. One of the things I want to go is equivalence. So you take similarity of a product, and similarity means technical, biological, and clinical. Product design, specifications, how it is distributed, the performance data, the parameters you will have for the product needs to be done to be technically same. It's very hard, for instance, for a software to claim technically same, because the similarity in the technology is mostly not given, and it's very hard to determine based on public sources or knowledge you can gain with the products. Biological parts is materials, patient contact, types, durations, and expiration. That is doable, that gives a good outcome. However, it's not. It's in many products very easy and straightforward to get that kind of data, especially if the product is a simpler technology, then you get that quite fast. In the case of softwares, it's not applicable. Clinical parts, a clinical similarity means the intended purpose is the same, and it has the same clinical effect as you want. That is the possibility to go equivalence with one additional step. That means you can use it if it is already an MDR product. Since nearly all products are now MDR products, that should not be a big problem for you, so you can go that way quite straightforward. In case, special case, class 3 products or implanted products, that means clinical trial is necessary, and unfortunately implanted implanted product or class 3 products also needs a consultation procedure of the notified body, which increases the timeline to by additional 9 months. So generally a product from a class 2A or class 2B product, certification time takes 9 to 14 months. For a class 2B implant or a class 3 product, you need to calculate 18 to 24 months, plus if you need to go consult a consultation procedure, 9 additional months to be covered into that. You can have the implanted or the class 3 product without the additional or an own clinical trial if it's already a product change. If the product is a similarity can be proven, and that means proven with the contract, that you have access to the sufficient data, you have an existing clinical data which was sufficient to fulfill everything, or it was an old product where you had data, where you have a common specification, also thinking about the system of the common specifications, it's quite useful here, or it's a certain product like dental fillings, braces, screws, wedges, bone plates, wires or terminals, and their clinical assessment is already existing, so that's so-called well-established technologies. And then one thing, that's the agreement of the notified body which deals with the consultation. Based on that, if that is all doable, then you can go without a clinical trial also for class C products. So, and one last pathway from that side is the Article 61.10. If you decide your product performance and safety does not need clinical data, or it is deemed inappropriate that you have additional clinical trials and data, then according to the interaction with the human and how this can be done, it can be utilized for bench testing without having a clinical trial combined to that. So with only the bench testing, you are ready to bring the product into the market compared to a clinical trial. For instance, syringes, because the syringe has no own clinical claim or a usable clinical claim, or scalpels, which are just cutting, so you can do the bench testing as well, you don't need a human for, or other surgical instruments, so smaller surgical instruments or easier surgical instruments can be used for that cases as well, quite good. So that is a very good outcome. So whenever you are unsure, what you need to do is you need to talk with the notified body you selected and do the structured dialogue procedure. In that you can clarify this kind of questions, and then we can go forward with those processes. Well done that. The last thing, so really last thing for today is the benefit risk assessment, which is a very important thing. So you have a risk analysis, you will have a clinical evaluation, and based on them you need to decide, is your benefit of the product higher in the clinical data, in the user acceptance, compared to the risk it poses. And nearly every product has some kind of risks. So what you need to challenge is now with your clinical data you achieved from trials or literature, look into your risk analysis if your line of acceptance is set correctly because it's state of the art, and also that your risks are adjusted to how the outcome will be done. If that's the case, then your product can be brought into the market based on the benefit risk assessment as a final step for the market access. And with that final step, I am very open to have additional questions, because else I would be done for right now. And else we will be in 2 weeks, we have the next, and 11 days, we have the next webinar. Any additional questions? Yes, you all can have the presentation. I noted 2 issues I made during writing it, so I will put them. I will remove those issues I had, and I will put then the presentation shortly into the to Linda, so she can send and organize them with you.
Yes, thank you. While questions are coming in, probably I would like to say many thanks to Stefan. Thanks a lot for your very clear, structured, and very practical presentation. I know that it is a very tough topic for researchers at a very early stage projects. And but you managed to present it in a way that we can at least start to understand those things, and then start to somehow follow those regulations.